I'm Marty Cohn, and welcome to episode 26 of PR Benefits, a show that explores the role of public relations in the COVID-19 era. I've been a PR practitioner for over 45 years, helping a wide array of organizations successfully communicate their messages to targeted audiences. I mistakenly thought that 9/11 would be the watershed event in my lifetime. Communicating in the aftermath of that tragic event was challenging. Then came the global economic downturn in 2008 with more lessons in crisis communications. However, 12 years later, we have the coronavirus pandemic and new challenges in uncharted waters have emerged. My guest today is Keith Sherman, president of Keith Sherman and Associates Public Relations in New York, New York. Let me tell you a little bit about Keith. Keith enjoys a communications career that began in the theater and grew to include film, television, media, music, lifestyles, sports, and international brands through Keith Sherman and Associates Public Relations, which he founded in 1989, over 30 years ago. Keith has represented more than 300 Broadway, off-Broadway, and touring productions, and he was the public relations executive of the Tony Awards for 18 years. Welcome, Keith.
Thank you, Marty. I'm very happy to be with you today.
Well, great. You know, Keith, the thing that I really enjoy about this show is I get to stalk my guests, or whatever you call Googling them.
Right.
And learning about them. But the one thing that I couldn't find about you is, how did you get started in public relations?
Oh, that's a great question. Like so much of what happens to us in life, I fell into it, or it kind of fell into me. I got a degree in marketing, a BSBA from Washington University in St. Louis. And one of my college roommates grew up north of New York City in Westchester, and his English teacher was the gentleman that founded the Roundabout Theater Company, which right now is a major, American cultural institution. But back then we were under a supermarket on 26th Street on the far west side. And I started going for coffee, running errands. Essentially, I was an intern. And one day, the artistic director's partner, the managing producer, said to me, "Keith, what are you going to do when you get out of college?" I said, "I guess I'll find a job." He said, "How would you like to be our marketing director?" I said, "Sure." So that lasted for about a year. I remember one day there was a printer that we owed $200 to, who met me in the lobby and beat me up. I had blood dripping from my face because the theater hadn't paid a $200 bill. And I said to myself, maybe it's time to find a new job. So a few months later, I found myself as the assistant to a gentleman named Seymour Crowitz, who was an esteemed Broadway press agent. He handled The Sound of Music and Gypsy. And I was his assistant at the ripe age of, maybe 22, working with Rex Harrison and Claudette Colbert and some really amazing stars on Broadway. And I got a taste of this. I lasted with him for a year. All the shows closed, and he had to let me go. And then I found a job with another PR company, and so it just progressed and it just grew. I've always been a guy that follows his heart. And I've been really blessed in my professional life to get connected with people who had wonderful projects where I was able to learn the craft of communications. And at some point, about a decade after my experience at the Roundabout, I decided that I could build a better mousetrap. And so I formed my own firm.
Wow, that's great. Now I have to ask you, I know that we're talking to you now from your home, but is your office covered with Broadway memorabilia?
Oh my God, my office is filled with a lot of stuff, including a Tony Award that Isabel Stevenson, before she passed away, said it was a prop that we used for photo shoots. But she said, "Keith, always keep this on your desk for the rest of your life." And so I do. But yes, it's filled with a lot of stuff from the hundreds of shows that I've worked on, and the kind of astonishing experiences that I've had. My office is, believe it or not, over Sardi's, right on 44th Street and Broadway, right in the heart of Times Square. I've been there for God a lot of years, nearly 20 years in that space right now. And for those of you who don't know, it's right in the middle of Broadway. Phantom of the Opera is across the street. Uh, it's a great location, and it also happens to be 4 blocks from my apartment, which is a little further west. But right now, because of the coronavirus, I am living at what was my weekend house, about 90 minutes north of New York City in Dutchess County. And I'm very happy to be living in the land that time forgot.
That's great. All right. So listen, I'm going to take you back in time. Speaking of time forgot, I'm going to take you back to pre-COVID. So we're going back at least 8 months. What would you consider? What would you consider some of the highlights of your pre-COVID-19 career?
Oh my goodness, there have been so many. I mean, in anticipation of talking to you today, I can't come up with a number, but it's thousands of different PR campaigns that I've managed for a real broad array of clients. Again, as you said, starting in the theater and expanding. The New York Times was a client of mine for 10 years. And for them, I handled a lot of their major events, like the Times Talk series and the New York Times Travel Show. And we had this amazing event called the Arts and Leisure Weekend. So it started with the theater, but it's expanded well beyond that. Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital was a client for a few years, as was the Visiting Nurse Service of New York. I learned that the skill of communications, I grew up in the theater on Broadway, off Broadway, but just figuring out how to get a client, how to get a project in the press has always been kind of a specialty of mine. I remember one summer, it was after one of the Olympics, I was introduced to a gentleman named Brian Boitano, who had just won the gold medal for America in figure skating. He had a publicist that he wasn't happy with. And after that dinner, we shook hands. Well, that was 30 years ago. He's still a client. And we still occasionally, he's not as active. Skating is not what it was back in the 80s and the 90s, but I'm very proud of that relationship. And, his goal back then too was, he was a great athlete, but we put on shows, we did television shows, we did tours, and it's been a very satisfying relationship.
That's great. All right. So now, current, we're in the middle of COVID. You're so heavily involved in theater. What are you doing for clients during COVID?
Well, that's a great question. Not a lot. Most of our projects are paused right now. My staff is furloughed. We are a staff of 4. So my agency is about 30 years old. One gentleman is with me for 20 years, another for 19, and our assistant for 11. So we are a strong, work family. But sadly, without an income, I can't pay them. So the government has been helping to take care of them, and we are optimistic for a better day. The theater is unlikely to come back much before a year from now, fall of 2021, just being realistic. So I'm attempting to secure work in other industries, as I've done for a long time. It's proving challenging right now. I've been sending out some news announcements, and I've been proactive for some projects, but it's a struggle, no doubt about that. But I have a strong spirit and a great sense of optimism. Even though my feet are firmly on the ground, my head is always in the clouds. I'm always dreaming. And I know we're going to come back. I know things are going to change again. And I'm just hoping for a better day. My landlord has been very generous to me, and I've been able to cut expenses, cut my overhead. I'm still pulling money out of my own personal savings to keep my office afloat, to pay bills that just need to be paid, whether or not I've got an income. And I want to believe that we will emerge again. I did some research. This is kind of interesting. In 1604, the bubonic plague swept through Europe. There was a play running at the Globe Theater at that point called King Lear. Perhaps you've heard of it. It was forced to shut down because of this pandemic. A couple of years later, it started to play again. People still watch it occasionally, So that's 400 some odd years ago. Fast forward to today. History, if we're mindful of what's happened in the past, it's a bellwether into the future. And I think that we will pull through this. We may not feel that strength right now, but I know that there is light ahead, even if it is off into the distance.
So Keith, let me ask you, in during this time when Broadway is closed, are you still in touch with, you know, producers, directors? I mean, for you to say that you don't think it will come back until 2021, are people making plans and you're
Oh
talking
my
to them?
God, yes. Artists create. Artists are not stopping to create, which is why we're seeing this plethora of Zoom performances, and things are in fact happening, but we just can't get people into a room. That's unsafe right now. And the government, rightly so, is not allowing it. But things will come back. Broadway will emerge. Off Broadway will emerge. Regional theaters are going to come back, but it's going to take some time. There will be. It's interesting. I was on a webinar recently with NYC and Co., which is the Convention and Visitors Bureau arm of New York City. And an executive said that the 2019 levels of tourism won't be back to New York for 3 to 4 years. Think about that, 3 to 4 years. So, one of the hallmarks of New York are its cultural institutions and events. So you have to figure that the works that really appeal to locals, New Yorkers and suburbanites, are the ones that are going to thrive at the beginning. People, I think, have a great pent-up demand to be entertained. People want to laugh. People want to go to a comedy. They want to go to a musical. I think people are starved for, in-person, face-to-face contact. That's not happening right away, but it will at some point. And I do think that the men and women that create and the business minds behind them will be bringing projects forward that will, entertain, educate, and delight audiences soon enough.
So I share your optimism in terms of we're going to get rid of this, and things are going to emerge. What do you think the role of PR is going to be when we emerge? Do you think there's going to be any changes?
Oh, count on that. I mean, one of the only constants in our lives is change. It's the only thing that we can count on. Look, so many media outlets have gone out of business. So many journalists have been furloughed from print, from digital, from broadcast outlets. I'm reaching out to people sometimes, and I get email messages, bounce backs that they're furloughed, they're gone, they've left, they're whatever. So change has not stopped, the pace of which has picked up enormously, and we'll see how things settle out. But I find it's also important to be in the moment, to be absolutely in the present. We can plan for the future. If you start planning too far out, I think that causes great stress in your heart and in your mind, because there's so many questions we have right now that there are simply no answers to. So that, cliche, that old expression, one day at a time, you take life one day at a time. But it's important, for me at least, and for the people in my life that I share what's in my heart with, is to be present and to deal with the reality of the moment. Plan for the future, but it'll take care of itself. God willing.
I hear you. Well, from your lips to God's ears. Thank you, Keith Sherman, president of Keith Sherman and Associates Public Relations in New York, New York, for being on the show.
Thank you, Marty. I'm so happy to be with you this morning.
All right, great. I'd like to thank also Rich Melanson at BCTV for helping to edit the show. Rachel Cohn, my daughter, who's a professor of art at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, for her technical assistance in the podcast. And also to Twin Musicom for the music, Hat the Jazz, that you hear at the beginning and end of the show. I'm Marty Cohn in Vermont. Stay healthy.